The president has suggested that it was another nation's incompetence that was to blame for this. Since this was a short press briefing, I just want to return to that timeline very quickly and just run through that with you. So there was a lot of focus here on testing, and I want to talk about testing, and I want to talk about the president's response. So we went over before this how President Trump fired the people from the Obama administration, fired the pandemic response unit from the National Security Council. So they could have been people helping us get ahead of this. Moving on from there, we now know, because of reporting from ABC, that the intelligence community first began to warn of this virus as early as November 2019. The president did not act then. January 8th, the CDC issued its first warning. That was about 110 days ago. President Trump is boasting about what has been done in the last 45 days of testing. Even if he hadn't been warned in November, by January 8th, his own CDC was issuing warnings. We could have been working on testing at that point. On the very next day, President Trump instead held a rally. The World Health Organization on January 9th reported on this crisis. On January 10th, the World Health Organization issued a comprehensive package of technical guidance with advice to all countries for how to detect, test, and manage the potential cases. 4 days later, President Trump held a rally. January 18th, the Washington Post reports that Secretary Azar of HHS tried to have an urgent call with the president about the crisis. President Trump repeatedly cut him off to berate him about his handling of an attempt to ban vaping, flavored vaping products. He then hung up the phone and went golfing. This next day he went golfing. January 20th, the next day, was the first day that South Korea and the United States confirmed their first cases, and the two countries could not have reacted more differently. South Korea immediately began setting up a nationwide testing plan. The United States did not. On January 22nd, Trump was asked whether he was worried. He said, no, not at all. Quote, we have it totally under control. It's one person coming in from China. It's going to be just fine. President Trump today was attacking China for not responding quickly. Well, on January 23rd, China shut down the entire city of Wuhan. The World Health Organization that day held an international news conference, and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer called for a public health emergency. On January, President Trump during this press conference said, well, Democrats didn't know what was coming. On the 23rd, Chuck Schumer called for a public health emergency. On January 27th, Joe Biden wrote an op-ed warning that the Trump administration was already failing in its response. On January 28th, then presidential candidate Senator Elizabeth Warren released her coronavirus plan, and that night President Trump held a rally. Only the next day was a task force formed. This seems to have come at the urging of President Trump's trade advisor, Peter Navarro, who sent an urgent memo warning of the risk of a full-blown coronavirus outbreak in the U.S. that could imperil the lives of, quote, millions of Americans. At this point, the State Department was working to bring home 6,000 Americans from Wuhan. Wuhan was already closed up, shut down because of this crisis, and even though we did not have tests, we did not have 6,000 tests, we brought 6,000 Americans home from Wuhan, even though they had likely been exposed to the virus. On January 30th, China locked down all of Hubei province, and the World Health Organization declared a global health emergency. That night, President Trump held a rally. In late January, we know that Secretary Azar requested $136 million to fight the virus. The White House rejected the request. February 1st, Trump went golfing. That day, Vietnam halted all flights from China, not just flights of foreign citizens, but all flights, anyone, anywhere in the world, even if you're a Vietnamese citizen. Only on February 2nd does President Trump put in place a partial travel restriction on China. He's characterized it as a ban. It is not. We know that some 40,000 people entered the country after that, not only American citizens, but other authorized travelers. And it may not have mattered because at that point some 300,000 travelers had entered the U.S. from China over the previous month. On February 3rd, the World Health Organization released a strategic preparedness and response plan to help protect states with weaker health systems. On February 5th, Secretary Azar upped his request, asked for $4 billion to fight the virus. The Washington Post reports that this led to a shouting match within the White House. On February 6th, testing. The World Health Organization began distributing 250,000 tests around the world. The U.S. said no thank you, we would produce our own. Around that time, the CDC produced a total of 90 tests, which turned out to be faulty. February 10th, President Trump proposed a budget that would cut the CDC's funding by 16%. This was this February. He was still trying to cut the CDC. February 10th, he said that it goes away in April. At a rally, twice in the day, later in a rally, he said, quote, by April, you know, in theory, when it gets a little warmer, it miraculously goes away. On February 15th, he went golfing. On February 19th, he held a rally. Didn't mention the coronavirus. On February 20th, he held a rally. On February 21st, he held a rally. On February 23rd, his trade advisor, Peter Navarro, sent an even more urgent memo warning that as many as, quote, 1.2 million souls could be jeopardized if the president didn't take greater action. Only the next day did he finally ask Congress for additional funding, but that same day by tweet he said, quote, the coronavirus is very much under control in the USA. February 25th, he tweeted, the CDC and my administration are doing a great job of handling the coronavirus. I think it's a problem that's going to go away. February 26th, he said, you treat this like the flu, the risk to the American people remains low. February 27th, he said, quote, like a miracle, it's going to disappear. February 28th, he held a rally where he referred to the way Democrats talked about the coronavirus as, quote, their new hoax. The next day was the first publicly confirmed U.S. death from coronavirus. That day, Washington state declared a state of emergency. March 3rd, President Trump said, quote, things are going very well, and said that he didn't think this would spread across the country. March 4th, he did an interview with Fox News where he suggested that it would be fine for people to go to work with the disease, and said, quote, it is very much in hand. March 5th, California and Maryland declared states of emergency. March 6th, Kentucky and Utah declared states of emergency. But he said, quote, I think we're doing a really good job in this country at keeping it down, a tremendous job. And he said on March 6th, anybody right now and yesterday, anybody that needs a test gets a test. They're here and the tests are beautiful. The tests are all perfect, like the letter was perfect. The transcription was perfect, right? That was not a true statement then. It is not true now. March 7th, New York declared a state of emergency and Trump went golfing. March 8th, he golfed. March 9th, he compared it to the flu in a tweet and suggested it would go away on its own. March 10th, he said, quote, it's really working out. It will go away. On March 11th, the WHO, the World Health Organization, upped its guidance and declared it was a global pandemic. Only on March 13th did President Trump declare a national emergency, finally. On March 16th, he told governors, respirators, ventilators, all of the equipment, try getting it yourself. Only in mid-March did the federal government begin placing orders for gears using the Defense Production Act. President Obama's HHS Secretary Kathleen Sebelius says, quote, we basically wasted 2 months. And she says that, quote, many tens of thousands of lives were lost as a result. On March 17th, he called it a pandemic for the first time and said that he knew it was a pandemic before anybody else did. On March 26th, President Trump, on March 26th, we crossed a very grim milestone. We made good on President Trump's America First promise. America surpassed all other countries for cases of coronavirus. Only the next day did President Trump finally formally invoke the Defense Production Act. And that's That is the true timeline of how we got where we are. So that's today's briefing. I'm Alan Piper, the senior politics producer for Now This.